You know, there are some commentaries that you'll come across that actually say that this is actually a repeat of what happened in chapter 14, that it's not a different feeding. And the reason those commentaries say that is because they say the exact same thing. How many of you have ever been brought through a trial by the Lord, and then at some point later you find yourself in a similar trial, and instead of demonstrating great faith, you act like you have no history at all with God, that you've never been here before, and you've never seen God work in your life, and you've never experienced His faithfulness, and you've never experienced His goodness, and you start freaking out and saying, "Oh, this is terrible. I don't see how this could ever work out. This is going to be the end of us." That's why this is here. That's why the Lord has to bring these disciples through the exact same situation, exact same circumstances. Because we're all like that. We're all like that. And so, you're in good company. You're just like the disciples. And the good news is God is long-suffering with us. Aren't you glad? Aren't you glad that the Lord doesn't say, "We just went through this in chapter 14. How could you already forget?" Or with you, when something happens, aren't you glad the Lord doesn't say, "Don't you remember last year? Or don't you remember 3 years ago when this happened? And how I got you through that storm?" This is the same thing. He's long-suffering with us. He's patient. He knows our frame, that we are but dust, that we're just dirt. So his disciples said, "Where can we get enough bread in this wilderness? We're out here in the middle of nowhere. It fills such a great multitude." And Jesus said, again, it's exactly the same. "Well, how many loaves do you have?" And the light bulb is still not going off for them. And this time they have more bread than they did last time. Well, I said, "We have 7 loaves and a few little fish." So he commanded the multitude to sit down on the ground. Again, we see that Jesus does everything decently and in order. It's not chaotic. "And he took the 7 loaves and the fish, and he gave thanks, and he broke them and gave them to his disciples, and then the disciples gave them to the multitudes." This is how ministry works. We see that Jesus always does things decently and in order, and we see that the disciples just distribute to others what they have received from Jesus. That's what we do. You just share with others what Jesus has given to you. You're just a delivery person, just delivering to you what Jesus has delivered to me. So they all ate, and they were filled. Again, this word means glutted. They're stuffed. And they took up 7, notice, large baskets full of the fragments that were left. Now, those who ate were 4,000 men, besides women and children, so maybe 10,000, 15,000 people if you include women and children. Now, in the feeding of the 5,000, back in chapter 14, there were 12 small baskets left over. I mentioned then that the 12 small baskets represent the 12 tribes of Israel. Here, with this feeding, there are 7 large baskets left over. If you're taking notes, a couple verses you can jot down. Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 1. Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 1. And Acts chapter 13, verse 19. Acts chapter 13, verse 19. There were 7 Gentile nations living in the land of Canaan. 7 Gentile nations living in the land of Canaan. Deuteronomy 7:1 says, "When the Lord your God brings you into the land which you go to possess, and has cast out many nations before you, the Hittites and the Girgashites and the Amorites and the Canaanites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites and the mosquito bites, 7 nations greater and mightier than you. Again, Matthew's written to a Jewish audience. And this number 7 here, he's in a Gentile region. He just went to Tyre and Sidon and ministered to a Canaanite woman. Now he's over in the Decapolis, the Gentile side of the Sea of Galilee, where the Gentiles live. And he has 7 large baskets left over. When he was on the other side of the Sea of Galilee, where he fed the 5,000, there's 12 smaller baskets left over. Jesus is the bread of life for the Jews. Jesus is the bread of life for the Gentiles. Jesus is the bread of life for everyone, no matter who you are. Jesus is the only one who can satisfy you. Everything else in this world will leave you empty, will leave you wanting, will leave you hungering for more. Jesus can only satisfy. And so he sent them away, verse 39, and they got into a boat, and he came to the region of Magdala. He crosses back over to the Jewish side. Magdala is near the city of Capernaum.